What if I told you there's a human body that's been resting inside a glass case for nearly a century, and it looks like the person just took a nap yesterday? And no, I'm not talking about some futuristic preservation tech or ancient mummification techniques. I'm talking about something that happened back in 1879. And here's the kicker, every scientist who's examined this body has walked away absolutely stumped. This is the story of Saint Bernadette, and what you're about to hear will either blow your mind or make you question everything you thought you knew about life and death. Oh, and just recently, Pope Leo XIV made an official statement about this, and it's got the entire Catholic world buzzing. But honestly, even if you're not religious, what I'm about to show you is going to seriously mess with your head, in the best possible way. But first, quick question, do you believe in miracles? Like, real life, scientifically unexplainable miracles? Because by the end of this video, your answer might be very different. Let's go back to 1858, to a tiny, almost invisible town in France called Lourdes. This place was so small and unremarkable that most people couldn't even find it on a map if you handed it to them. And living in this little town was a 14-year-old girl named Bernadette Soubirous. When I say her life was hard, I mean, it was rough. Her family was so poor that they were literally living inside what used to be a jail cell. One cramped room, and that was it. Bernadette couldn't read or write. She had severe asthma that made it hard for her to breathe most days. And she'd already survived cholera, which was pretty much a death sentence for most people back then. By every social standard, Bernadette was a nobody. She wasn't famous. She wasn't educated. She wasn't powerful. But this is where everything changes. On February 11, 1858, Bernadette was out collecting firewood, because that's what poor kids did to help their family survive. She wandered near this little grotto, a cave-like spot near a river, and that's when it happened. She saw her. Standing there was a woman, radiating light, beautiful beyond description, dressed in white and blue. Bernadette would later say she had never seen anything like it before. Now, let's just be real, if a 14-year-old today said she saw a glowing woman in a cave, what would you think? Yeah, most people thought the exact same thing back then. People assumed she was making it up, that maybe she was hallucinating, maybe she was just some poor girl desperate for attention. But here's the twist, it wasn't a one-time thing. This mysterious woman appeared to Bernadette 18 times over the next few months. 18. And word started to spread like wildfire. Every time Bernadette went to the grotto, more people came to watch. Some were there to mock her. Some were there to try to catch her in a lie. And some came because, deep down, they hoped what she was saying might actually be true. Of course, the local authorities were not having any of this. They interrogated Bernadette over and over again. They threatened to throw her in prison. They tried to break her down, to scare her into admitting she made it all up. But here's what's crazy, Bernadette never once changed her story. Not under pressure, not when the whole town thought she was insane, not even when the police and priests grilled her relentlessly. Just think about that for a second. Have you ever tried to lie about something when you're under serious pressure? Most adults crack in minutes. This was a teenage girl, holding her ground for months. And then came the moment that would change everything. During one of these appearances, the woman told Bernadette to dig in the dirt near the grotto. Imagine what that must have looked like, this sickly, poor girl, on her knees, digging in the mud while crowds of people stared at her, probably thinking she'd completely lost it. But then, out of nowhere, water started bubbling up from the ground. A spring. One that had never been there before. And it wasn't just any water. Within days, people started claiming this water was healing them. Blind people began to see. Paralyzed people started walking. I know, it sounds like something straight out of a movie. But this was real life. And finally, the woman revealed her identity. She told Bernadette, "I am the Immaculate Conception." Now, here's why that's mind-blowing. Bernadette had no idea what those words meant. She was uneducated, remember? She'd never heard that phrase before. But when the local priest heard it, his jaw practically hit the floor. Because Immaculate Conception was a theological doctrine that had only been officially recognized by the Catholic Church 4 years earlier. How would this poor, illiterate teenager know such a specific, complex term? The miracles didn't stop with the spring. Even while she was still alive, Bernadette became known for miraculous healings. One of the most famous stories involves a baby who was dying of tuberculosis. The doctors had completely given up. Bernadette had embroidered a small piece of clothing, just a simple little cloth. When that cloth was placed on the baby, the child was completely healed. Instantly. There was another moment when a little girl who couldn't walk was brought to Bernadette. By this time, Bernadette was living in a convent, and her superiors had told her not to get involved. But Bernadette gently placed the child on the ground, and that little girl immediately got up and started running around like she'd never been sick. But maybe the most jaw-dropping moment happened during one of the apparitions. Bernadette was holding a candle when the flames suddenly engulfed her entire hand. We're talking about fire wrapping around her hand for 15 minutes, while hundreds of people watched. When it was over, her hand was completely unharmed. Not even a burn mark. Nothing. Seriously, try holding your hand over a candle for 5 seconds. Go ahead, I'll wait. Bernadette's life was short. She died at the age of 35, after years of suffering from painful tuberculosis. And what's incredible is that she never saw herself as special. She never sought fame. She spent her final years quietly, offering her pain and her prayers for other people. She passed away on April 16, 1879. Normally, this is where the story would end. A humble girl sees visions, performs miracles, dies young, and is remembered as a saint. End of story. Except, it wasn't the end. So, you'd think Bernadette's story would have quietly faded after her death, right? A girl has some visions, some healings happen, she dies young, case closed. But no. What happened next is what truly turned her story into something no one could ignore. In 1909, 30 years after her death, the Catholic Church decided to exhume Bernadette's body as part of the official process to declare her a saint. Now, this isn't unusual. When someone is considered for sainthood, part of the process involves verifying their remains. Typically, by that point, all that's left are bones, maybe a few scraps of clothing, normal decomposition stuff. So when the church officials opened Bernadette's coffin, they expected exactly that, bones. What they found instead shook them to their core. Her body looked like it had only just been buried, like maybe a week ago. Her skin was still soft and smooth. Her muscles were intact. Her fingernails were perfect. There was no smell of decay. None. It was like death had somehow skipped over her. And here's the thing, the people who were there weren't religious fanatics. They weren't just church people hoping for a miracle. The exhumation was witnessed by two respected doctors, Dr. David and Dr. Jordan, who had no personal investment in the story. They were there to conduct an unbiased medical examination. And they walked away absolutely baffled. But the church didn't stop there. They wanted to be 100% certain. So 10 years later, in 1919, 40 years after Bernadette's death, they exhumed her body again. This time, the examination was led by Dr. Talon and Dr. Comte, both of whom went in expecting to see the usual signs of decay that come with time. But guess what? Same result. Her body was still perfectly preserved. Her organs, heart, liver, everything, were still intact. Her skin was still soft. Her joints were still flexible. It was like her body simply refused to rot. Dr. Comte wrote in his official report that what he witnessed was, quote, impressive and not natural. Which is scientific code for, we have absolutely no explanation for this. Just to put this in perspective, if you've ever seen what happens to a body after just a few weeks underground, you know it's not pretty. Decomposition is brutal. 30, 40 years later, there should have been nothing left except bones. Yet here was Bernadette, looking practically untouched by time. But wait, it gets even crazier. In 1925, 46 years after her death, the church conducted a third exhumation. This was their final verification before officially declaring her a saint. Dr. Comte was brought back in for this one. His conclusion? The flexibility of her muscles and the integrity of her entire body were beyond anything science could explain. The only noticeable change was that her face and hands had darkened slightly from being exposed to the air during the earlier examinations. So, to protect those areas, they applied a thin layer of wax to her face and hands. And that's exactly how she's displayed to this day. Since August 3, 1925, Saint Bernadette's body has been resting in a crystal casket in Nevers, France. That's nearly 100 years of people from all over the world coming to see what many believe is a living miracle. And here's something that almost everyone who visits says: they describe feeling an overwhelming sense of peace, like they're standing in the presence of something holy, something that can't quite be explained. So you might be wondering, okay, that's wild, but what does this have to do with today? Well, remember that spring? The one Bernadette dug up with her bare hands? Yeah, it's still flowing. And people are still being healed by it. The Catholic Church has officially recognized 70 miraculous cures directly connected to the water from Lourdes. 70. And we're not talking about vague, "I felt a little better" kind of stories. We're talking about documented, life-changing, medically verified healings. Cancer patients walking away completely healed. People who were paralyzed suddenly able to stand and walk. Blind people regaining their sight. And here's where it gets really interesting. The Catholic Church doesn't just slap the word "miracle" on anything. In fact, the Church has one of the strictest, most skeptical review processes in the world when it comes to verifying miracles. Each case goes through layers of rigorous medical and scientific investigation. They bring in teams of doctors, most of whom aren't even religious, who examine these people before and after. They run every test imaginable. They try to find any natural explanation. And if, after all of that, the experts unanimously agree that what they're seeing is scientifically impossible, that's when the Church calls it a miracle. But here's the crazy part: those 70 miracles? That's just the official number. The unofficial testimonies? They number in the thousands. Thousands of people claim they've been healed at Lourdes, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And every single year, 6 million pilgrims travel to Lourdes. 6 million people from all walks of life, carrying their pain, their desperate prayers, their last hopes, and many of them leave transformed. That's more people than the population of some entire countries. And this isn't just something from the dusty pages of history. This is happening right now. Which brings us to the present moment. Pope Leo XIV, the leader of 1.4 billion Catholics worldwide, just made an official declaration about Saint Bernadette's incorrupt body. And here's why that matters. In a world where faith is constantly being challenged, where science is often used to dismiss belief, here's the Pope standing up and saying, "Look, we can't explain this. Science can't explain this. But it's real. It's happening. And it's not just some medieval legend, it's something we're witnessing in our modern world, right now." But honestly, as incredible as the miracles are, as shocking as Bernadette's incorrupt body is, I don't think that's the most powerful part of her story. What's truly beautiful is that God chose someone completely ordinary. A poor, sick, illiterate girl who the world had written off. Someone nobody would have expected to become a messenger of hope and healing. And Bernadette herself got it. She once said, "The Virgin used me like a broom to do her work, and when the work was done, she put me back in my corner." It's so simple. So humble. And so profound. Maybe you feel ordinary. Maybe you feel like your life doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Maybe you think you're too small or too insignificant to make a difference. But Bernadette's story says, you're wrong. Bernadette's story tells us that the extraordinary often hides in the most ordinary people. Think about it, she wasn't rich. She wasn't influential. She wasn't even educated. And yet, her life has touched millions across centuries. And maybe that's the point. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have the most followers, the best resume, or the loudest voice to be part of something bigger. Sometimes, the quietest life carries the loudest message. But let's come back to one question: how is Bernadette's body still preserved? Skeptics, scientists, and historians have all tried to solve this mystery. Some have proposed natural mummification, where environmental conditions slow down the decay. Others have suggested some form of accidental preservation, maybe the soil composition, maybe the temperature, maybe even the chemicals in the coffin. But here's the thing: none of those theories fully explain what happened. Natural mummification usually dries out the body, shrivels the skin, hardens the muscles. Bernadette's body? Still soft. Still flexible. Still intact. Accidental chemical preservation usually leaves visible signs, staining, discoloration, unnatural textures. None of those were found on Bernadette's body. In fact, when doctors touched her skin, they described it as lifelike and warm. Even the most aggressive preservation attempts in modern science don't maintain a body's condition like this for over 100 years without constant intervention. And remember, Bernadette's body wasn't embalmed. Nothing was done to prevent decay. It's like time simply didn't touch her. Dr. Kant, the leading physician who examined her body multiple times, eventually admitted that what he saw defied every explanation he knew. His medical reports are still available today, and they all reach the same conclusion: there is no known scientific explanation for the state of this body. Even some non-religious scientists have gone on record saying, "We just don't know." But maybe that's the point. Maybe not everything can, or should, be explained. For believers, Bernadette's incorrupt body is a visible sign that the spiritual world is real, that sometimes God leaves little footprints in history that we can still see. For skeptics, it's an unsolved mystery, a challenge to our modern mindset that says science can explain everything. And maybe that tension is exactly where the real power of this story lives. Whether you believe in miracles or not, you can't deny that this happened. Her body is there. You can see it. You can touch the spring she discovered. You can read the medical records. You can visit Lourdes today and meet people whose lives were changed forever. And maybe the question isn't, is this scientifically possible? Maybe the real question is, what does this stir inside you? Does it make you curious? Does it make you doubt? Does it make you wonder if, maybe, just maybe, there's more to this life than what we can measure? Let's zoom out for a second. We live in a world obsessed with answers. We want proof. We want data. We want to be in control. But stories like Bernadette's break that control. They remind us that some things sit just outside our reach. And maybe that's exactly what makes them beautiful. So, let's circle back to that question I asked you at the start. Do you believe in miracles? Maybe you came into this video thinking, no way. That's just fairy tale stuff. But now? Well, maybe it's not so clear-cut anymore. Maybe you're not fully convinced. Maybe you still think there's some logical explanation we just haven't figured out yet. And you know what? That's okay. But maybe, just maybe, there's a tiny part of you that's starting to wonder. What if some things really are meant to be mysteries? What if some things are real, not because science can prove them, but because we feel their weight in our souls? And what if ordinary people, people like Bernadette, people like you, are sometimes the very ones chosen to carry those mysteries into the world? I'll leave you with Bernadette's own words, words she whispered on her deathbed. I was nothing. And of this nothing, God made something. Thanks for watching. If this story made you think, if it sparked even a little curiosity in you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Bernadette's incorrupt body is a miracle, or do you think there's a scientific explanation we just haven't found yet? Let's talk about it in the comments. See you in the next video.